All right, so it is now time to start your slab mug project. So the reason it's called a slab mug is that you are going to make a slab of clay and then cut a shape out of that to make your mug. So the first thing you're gonna need is a template. So I brought two here. So this is what a lot of people will do for their template, or they'll just wing it without a template and they'll cut something about this size. But you're going to roll it into a mug. So if I make this into a cylinder, this is not really a good size for a mug. Like if you look at this, this does not work very well for a mug. This is more like a beaker or something. So I would recommend something about this size, possibly. So this makes a pretty decent mug, something about like that. You can make it a little bit shorter than this, you can make it taller than this, you can make it wider, you can make it narrower, it's up to you. But I'm gonna go with something about like this. This works out really well because this is like a standard sheet of paper that's just been cut in half down the middle. So like piece of paper here, cut it in half down the middle. And this makes a pretty good size mug in my opinion. Like I'm happy with this as a mug. So this is what I'm gonna go with as my template. So I'm gonna set it to the side and I am going to get my ball of clay. So I'm going to start smashing it down pretty thin. If you go in with just a huge ball of clay and you go in with your rolling pin, it's gonna take you 12.5 years to roll it out, which is not what you want. So if you can flatten it out with your hands first, that will help you out a little bit. Now you don't want to make just like a perfect circle because we're gonna cut this out of it. So if you have a circle, that's not gonna do you any favors. So try to make something that's like a little bit longer on one side than the other. So kind of more like an oval. And I'm actually going to tear some pieces off of the sides, stick them here on the ends. I have something kind of like this. So you do want to make sure, I know I said in the pinch pot video, you don't want to put your clay on paper towels. For this one you do, because it's going to get stuck to the table otherwise. So I'm going to put this here on the paper towels. But I do want to pick it up every so often and make sure it's not sticking to the paper towels. And generally this part you want to do fairly quickly because you don't want it drying out. So I'm going to get my rolling pin and roll back and forth. The first few passes are just gonna be to kind of smooth out the bumps. The first few passes are not gonna necessarily start flattening it. So I feel a bump right here, so I'm kind of tapping that down. Same thing here. You will often tend to get lumps at the ends, and that's because a lot of times when you roll, you will go like this, and then as you go, you'll kind of lift up before you get to the end, and then you'll end up with a huge chunk of clay at the end. So you do wanna make sure that you are rolling all the way off. And you'll notice I am not going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth like this. That again is gonna give you piles of clay at the end. I'm starting at one end and I am rolling all the way down. You can also see that my clay, I don't know, maybe you can't see, but my clay is not very smooth in some areas, and that is because there's clay stuck to this roller. So I'm gonna scrape that off before continuing. This is probably gonna happen to you at some point. Okay, so like I said earlier, you do want to check every so often to make sure you're not sticking to the paper towel. Some days it will stick more than others. Mine is doing pretty good right now. I've got a few areas I say as it is literally all stuck. The first part of it was going well. This part not so much. But it kind of depends on like the moisture in the air and how wet the clay is and stuff like that. This I can deal with though. These we can pull off. Also, if you were to leave them in, honestly, they would burn off in the clay, so it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I'll probably work on that here in a minute as I get it a little bit flatter. So, if you didn't notice, I picked it up and then I flipped it over before I put it back down. So we're gonna do that a couple of times. So I'm gonna get my template here, kind of measure, see how I'm doing. I'm still needing to go a little bit longer, but the thickness is pretty good. But if I did want, and I'll go ahead and show you, because like this is a little bit thinner than this, so I could turn it this way, and I could give it a few rolls back and forth this way. Whichever direction you are rolling is the direction that your clay is going to go. So that'll make it a little bit wider. Again, I don't really know if you can see or not, but there is some cracking going on. You may get that some, you will probably get it less than the one that I am doing, because this one is actually the same lump of clay that I used to make the pinch pot, just because I didn't want to be wasteful. So it is a little bit drier than the clay you will be using. If you get a fresh piece of clay right from the block that has not been used before, you probably will not get quite as much cracking as I'm getting. But even if you do get some cracking, I showed you how in the pinch pot video to remove that with some water and your finger kind of blending it, smoothing it out a little bit. Now that I've rolled this out a little bit more, it's a little bit easier to remove the paper towels. You're probably going to get paper towels stuck in it at some point. Do your best to get them out. These little pieces I'm not super worried about. Like I say, it will, the paper towel is gonna burn off in the kiln. It's gonna catch on fire, it's gonna burn away, and then it's gonna burn so much that it like completely disintegrates into ash. And especially these tiny little pieces, you're not gonna really notice. So, oops, let's get that off. Let's check this again. Feeling pretty good about this. I'm gonna go just a little bit more because like this corner down here doesn't have any clay under it. And I'm also going to check the thickness. I think it could use just a couple more rolls, just to get it evened out and as thick, or rather as thin, I suppose, as I want it to be. So I'm gonna do one more on each side. One last roll on this side, just to smooth everything out. And yeah, that's gonna work perfectly. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my tool and I'm just gonna chop it off to match the templates. Okay, so that's what I have. And now I'm going to pick it up and move these paper towels out of the way. You want to handle your slab pretty carefully. It could definitely crack and break. So I'm gonna go here. And now I have to decide what to do about these little pieces where there wasn't quite enough clay around the edges. You may or may not have this issue depending on how much you started with. Like I said, I use the piece of clay for my pinch pot, which is probably not quite enough. But you know, like I said, I didn't want to be wasteful. I didn't want to use any more. You may not have these issues, but if you do, because you very well may, you have to decide whether you want to patch them, like add a little bit more clay in here, or cut it off. This side is so bad that I'm probably just going to cut it off, which is fine because I thought my mug was a little tall anyway. So I'm just going to go like this and use the paper almost just kind of like a ruler. And just take a little bit off there. I'm saving my scraps because I'm going to use them later. And then this side I'm just going to patch. So I'm just going to get a little piece of clay and kind of stick it in there. Just a teensy little bit more. And then this one doesn't really need any extra clay. It just needs to be smoothed a little bit. Okay, so I've got my mug. And it's like this. I've got my little slab here ready to make into a mug. So I'm going to while it's still nice and wet. You don't want to be doing this with dry clay. If you roll out your slab and then the bell rings, you might as well throw it away. You're not going to be able to come back the next day and do anything with it. You have to get the shape done the first day. So I need to join these two pieces. So I'm going to add a little bit of water. That's going to help them stick together. And then I'm also just going to rough them up just a little bit. Like I said in the pinch pot video, smooth clay does not stick to smooth clay. Okay, and then I am going to join them here. And I'm not super, my mug shape is very wonky. I'm not super worried about that right now. I'm just wanting to get this done. So I'm going to start kind of blending like this. If you want this mug to stay together, you need to have it to where you cannot see that these are not the same pieces of clay. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the inside. I'm going to blend it real good. You want the seam to completely go away. I'm actually even going to get a little bit of clay and kind of put it on top of the seam. Let me just do that real quick and show you. So I've put it on top of the seam right there, if you can kind of see that. And then I'm going to blend that out, and that's good. That little patch is going to help it stick together. I'm using the tool a little bit. Again, the goal is that when I am done, you can no longer see where the seam used to be. It should look like any other part here. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on this side. And then as I worked on the inside, it pushed the outside apart a little bit, so I'm gonna go back and do some more blending here. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna kind of set this to the side. Go ahead and somewhat form it into the shape that you want it to be, but keep in mind that it's gonna distort over time and we'll come back and reshape it again. But I'm gonna set this to the side. Okay, so I have a new piece of clay. Like with the pinch pots, I am going to make it into somewhat of like a rounded shape. You don't necessarily have to get a new piece of clay. If you had enough left over from your slab cutoffs, you could just use that. But I got a new piece because I didn't have much left over. Okay, so I'm trying to make it round, but instead of trying to make it a ball, I'm trying to more make it like a disc. And then once I have it where it's pretty round, I'm gonna start flattening it with my fingers. Okay, and then I'm gonna get my roller. Give it a couple good passes. Pick it up so it doesn't get stuck. We'll pretend like this is the first time I filmed it, and that the first time I filmed it, it didn't get stuck and I had to start over. You'll notice what I'm doing. In addition to flipping it over, I'm also rotating it each time so that I can get something that is like circular instead of something that is oval and oblong. The goal for this slab, this is gonna be the bottom of your mug. So I would probably try to keep it a little bit thicker than the sides of your mug. And you want it to be big enough that your mug can sit on it. So let's check how this is going. Oh yeah, that's perfect. So now is your chance to decide which side of your mug is gonna be the top and which side is gonna be the bottom. Ideally, probably the prettier side should be the top, and the bottom is gonna be attached anyway, so you won't see it, which is why I put the ugly side down. And this is your chance to really make it nice and round and exactly the shape you want it to be, because after this point, you're not gonna be able to change the shape. The shape is fixed at this point. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to use my tool and I'm going to cut the base around the cylinder, potentially maybe leaving a little bit extra, not like half an inch, but like, I don't know, like a centimeter or something, like a tiny little bit extra, just to make sure that you don't accidentally cut your mug. Okay, and then I'm going to do this tricky little bit where I turn it upside down. several places I did not cut well enough. This is why you don't just try to pull it off, because then you'll just end up ripping clay. Okay, and then I have it like this. Fix up any issues that happened, and then I know you're like, oh, it just attaches, why am I taking it off? Take it off. Go through and add some water here. And then rough it up. This is called scoring it, by the way. When you rough it up like this, it's called scoring the clay. I'm gonna score here. And then I'm also gonna score around the edges of this thing. I don't wanna go too far in though, because then that will interfere with the bottom of the mug. These mugs, depending on which glaze you use, are technically safe to eat and drink out of. If you do a very good job making them, if there are no bumps or cracks where food could potentially get caught and grow and cause bacteria, and if you choose one of the food safe glazes. Some of my glazes are food safe, some of them are not. The ones that are Blick are food safe. If you have any questions though, just ask me. I can tell you if it's food safe or not. The ones that are not are the ones that have like crystals in them and stuff. Okay. So, I'm gonna put this down. And then I'm just gonna blend. Again, you should not see the seams. That's one of the things you're being graded on actually, is your seams. If I can see your seams, you don't get points, or you don't get as many points. The goal is that I cannot see where things are attached. Okay, I am careful with all clay projects, but especially this one because the base is very delicate. Be careful to pick it up every 2 to 3 minutes. I have seen the most beautiful mugs in the world get stuck to tables, and then we pull it up and the base rips off and you gotta start all over. So make sure to pick it up every couple of minutes. Clay is rather sticky just because of it. And it also, again, depends on the amount of moisture in the air. It depends on how moist the clay is that day. All of those things can contribute. The fact that I have a pile of clay stuck to the table here, if I were to set this on here, that would cause problems because the clay would try to stick, because this is very rough clay. The clay would try to stick to that. So I have got it all the way attached on the outside. I'm gonna do some blending on the inside, and actually it is easiest to blend out the seam on the inside. Let me see if you can see this at all. There is somewhat of a seam on the inside. It is easiest to blend that out by getting a couple little pieces of clay and just kind of putting them over the seam and then blending that out. So I'm just kind of like getting a little tube here and putting it in there like this. And then I will use this tool. Depending, if your mug's a little bit shorter, you might be able to use your fingers, but I'm gonna use this tool to blend it out. And as I am doing that, I am keeping, if you can see, I am keeping this hand on the outside so that I don't just poke right through my mug. I'm giving it a little bit of support. Okay, so you can hopefully kind of see down here in this area where I have blended out that seam a lot. I should probably keep going, and obviously I would do it to the rest of it as well. But let's be real, I'm gonna wad this piece of clay back up and use it to make the next piece of pottery here in a minute. So I'm not gonna do that for no reason. But yeah, you wanna blend it out to where you can't see the seam. Again, that's one of the things you're being graded on, is that you can't see the seams anymore. So I have my mug. I'm happy with the shape. This is a good stopping place for one day. You don't wanna try to add too much because this is very flexible. So if I were to try to like carve in this today, I'm gonna end up going like this and I'm gonna end up bending my mug. So that's not ideal. You wanna leave this wrapped in a bag, but not wrapped too tightly. You want a little air to come to this. The technical pottery term for where you want it to be is leather hard. You want it to be as hard as leather, but like people don't know what leather feels like for the most part. It's a very outdated term. But you wanna come back and work on it when it is not flexible, but not like dry and crusty. So one day is pretty good about this. Wrap it loosely in a bag, let a little bit of airflow in there, and it can dry out a little bit, and you can come back and work on it the next day. The pinch pot, you didn't necessarily have to do that because the walls are a lot thicker. These walls are a lot thinner and taller probably than your pinch pot, and it's just a lot more delicate. So I'm gonna set this over to the side. If you have time for that on the first day, cool. That's the things you need to get done on the first day you're working on it. You gotta roll out the slab, you gotta shape the slab into a cylinder, you gotta get it attached to a base. None of those things can be done in multiple sittings. You can't make a slab one day and then roll the slab up the next day. You could maybe shape it into a cylinder and then attach it to the base the next day. That would be iffy though. You should try to get all of that done in one day. If you have time, if that doesn't take a super long time, you can also make the handle that day because the handles also attach best whenever they're dry. So you can make whatever kind of handle you want to. You could roll a handle out like this. I'm gonna bring my mug back over here so I can show you some handle options. So you could roll out a handle like this. You could do this except for flatten it out a little bit if you wanted to. Might actually get my rolling pin and just kind of like, whew, that made it real wonky. But you could do something like this. When you attach it, you can just attach it like this, but you can also do something fancy and, you know, attach it like this if you want to. You can get like, let me just show you. You can get 2 strands and make them a little bit thinner. So this is too thin to be handle on its own, but if I combine it with another one, then I can like twist them together and make a handle. You can also braid them, but it never fails. Somebody comes to me and they're like, I want to do a braided handle. I'm like, okay, cool, just get some, you know, get some little ropes and braid them. And they're like, oh, I don't know how to braid. Don't do a braided handle if you don't know how to braid, or go learn how to braid. I'm an art teacher, not a braiding teacher. So you could do something like that. That's probably a little big. Like that maybe. You can, you can do, I've even had people, instead of doing like a handle, do something like this and attach 2 little, almost kind of like knobs to it. I'm not attaching these well, I'm just throwing these on here so I can demonstrate. And then you hold it like this. Oops. Those are not attached well, but you kind of like slip your fingers like between them and hold it like that. So you could do that. It's up to you. You can make any kind of handle you want to. You can also add other designs to this. You can, you know, attach things like the pinch pot. You can carve stuff in there. It's up to you, as long as it is made from a slab, attached to a base that is also made from a slab, and has some sort of handle attachment. Whether it is a traditional handle or something a little bit different, it has to have some sort of attachment on the side. And again, one of your requirements is that I don't see seams. So the seam from the handle should also be gone, unless that's somehow part of your design. If you have something like that where like you want it, anyway, talk to me if you have an idea that includes seams. But for the most part, seams should be completely gone. So that is how you make your slab mug. Like with the pinch pot, if you have any questions about, is this too thick, is this too thin, what about this, what, you know, whatever, just talk to me. I'm more than happy to help you, but that at least gets you started. So once you have finished this video and filled out the worksheets, you can move on to your sketch and get started on your slab mug whenever you are ready.